So it's been a while. Half a year to be exact since the last entry in this series. I made the bold claim at the very end of episode 3 that I'd be publishing a fourth and final video about the no-jump Skywalker Saga run the following week, which obviously never happened. Why is that? Well, it was for a couple of reasons. Between video 3 and the unreleased video 4, a patch came out that removed almost every technique we had used in the run previous. It was a swift kick in the gut. There was a technique we used in the run called scope launching, which allowed for us to get some crazy height without ever pressing the jump button. Not only did this patch make the glitch a little bit harder, but also straight up removed it from a lot of the cast. It also removed force flying from the Darth Maul stage, which made the only alternative creating a bridge, which, well, it takes a very, very long time, to say the least. Because there wasn't at the time a clear way to downgrade patches in the game, it just kind of felt pointless. I wanted to move on from this series and do other things with the channel, which put me at a crossroad. I could spend hours in a row retrying old things with new methods, or I could start something new, and I chose the latter. I was quite frankly getting bored and frustrated with the challenge, since the end of it seemed to only create more issues. But I made myself a promise. I would keep trying out all the sections intermittently off camera, and if anything else was ever found to bring the game's jump total near zero, then I would make a follow-up video. And as you can tell by the existence of this video, something was found. Before we dive into that, let me say that if you haven't watched the other 3 videos in the series, you might be kind of lost. I'll have a link to the first one down below, and I trust you can find your way from there. The next thing I should mention is that I am playing on an older version of the game. Thanks to Wii Super's guide, there exists a somewhat tedious but foolproof method to downgrade the game to an earlier patch. You will have to have the Steam version of the game to do so, sorry console players. Once my game was downgraded, I got to work rewatching all of my old videos on the topic to see what we still had yet to do. And a quick side note, if you think listening to your own voice is bad, try listening to your own voice on 2 times speed. They could use that as like a capital punishment, and I wouldn't be surprised. Ben to guide him over with very careful bounces from the left to the right while the second player pulls the trampoline. But either way, let's continue moving forward. The rest of level 1 goes by very easily. Anyways, we had quite a few areas to improve upon. Specifically, 27 jumps in the high ground, 1 jump in a plan to save Han, 3 in the Chewbacca defense, 2 during scavenger training, and 6 during the Dark Side cave sequence. While we'll cover all of these in due time, we should first talk about the discovery that reignited my passion for this challenge. On November 13th of 2022, speedrunner Bixel posted this video in the Skywalker Saga speedrun Discord. And I have to warn you, if you're photosensitive or suffer from any kind of epilepsy, you might want to minimize the tab for now, because this video is very, very flashy. You might be wondering what's going on here, so let me explain. Bixel is holding down the F2 and escape key on his keyboard. Escape is the universal pause button for the game, and F2 is the pause button and drop-in button used for player 2. Holding these 2 down causes the game to pause every other frame, creating a frame-perfect buffer. But for whatever reason, this causes the momentum in the game to abruptly change, with quite a few weird side effects. Whatever momentum you had while activating the first pause, you'll keep as long as you continue to hold down the F2 button. In the video, Bixel jumps and then mid-jump activates the pause glitch, allowing his character to keep the upward momentum. This also works if you run off a ledge. You'll keep your forward momentum but only drop down a little bit during the active frames. Well, it's cool that we can run off of ledges and keep the height. But if we have to jump to continue going up, how can we gain that upward momentum? Well, I'm glad you asked. Running up a slope won't just allow you to run at the same diagonal angle forever. Your character will still try and stick to the ground. I'm unsure if this is because the game wants you to be on the ground, or if it considers grounded movement as horizontal regardless of the direction, but there still is one more option: using built-up speed to go airborne from sloped terrain. Anyone who's played this game will know that if you're fast enough, running at an angle will shoot you decently high into the air. And if we activate the glitch while in this state, we do in fact travel upwards. This means in each of these levels, if we have access to a steep slope, we can gain nearly infinite height. But this is harder than you may think. Let's take a plan to save Han, for example. In this level, you don't have access to sprinting, except for under extremely specific circumstances, usually revolving around being in a certain room. You also gain access to sprinting if you're being targeted by the Gamorreans. For whatever reason though, I didn't have access to sprinting at all in this level, even when riding the Super Gonk. This was most likely a pre-patch bug, so pause flying was out of the question, but we did have one more option. I could still sprint off a ledge and maintain decent height for a long period of time. The only problem would be finding that height without jumping. The staircase didn't work, I would always just walk down normally. I couldn't dismount onto any objects in this area, and none of them would be high enough either. So I brought back an old friend. Using a scope launch, I could propel myself to ceiling height, land on top of the bridge's support, and walk myself down to grab the bar, subtracting one jump from this area. Next up, we can head to Endor, where instead of taking 4 jumps during the Ewok puzzle, we can just use this rocky terrain to activate pause flying, drop out of bounds, and walk towards the end level trigger, a lot simpler than the previous methods. Scavenger training is pretty much the same thing, with the sand dunes providing plenty of area to pause fly, allowing us to even skip crafting a lot of the tools. Luckily for you guys, who love to watch me suffer, it didn't stay this simple. We had another 33 jumps to still knock down in this challenge, and we're gonna start with the level that ruined it all, the high ground. Fast forward to the segment where you have to knock Obi-Wan and Anakin off their dual platform and pause. Instead of doing things the normal way, we're gonna do some setup. Make player 1 R2 and start pause flying as them up to where Anakin and Obi-Wan are. Push Anakin into the lava, then use both halves of C-3PO or Super Gonk to press the required buttons. This should put R2 into the duel sequence with Anakin and Obi. Complete the rest of this section normally until we hit a snag. This is where things get interesting. This is where a lot of the jumps as Obi-Wan came in. But now that we have R2 here, we can grapple up the first third of the tower without having to jump. But R2 can't activate the next 2 phases of the tower falling, and we don't have access to any slopes or speed to start a pause fly. We've got a Jedi and a droid on the same platform, and about 40 minutes of messing around with that concept, I noticed something when playing as 3PO, who for some reason was stuck back on the mainland. There was a platform not too far away from where the tower was. My original plan was to pause fly there as 3PO, but I was unable to change who player 1 was, they were just locked into being Obi-Wan. I knew I had to get back there if it was the last thing I did. Over there, I assumed I would get my speed back and be able to find some kind of slope to activate a pause fly with. But just how was I going to get there in the first place? The answer is another old friend. This one is called Super Gonk. As 3PO, I could remotely enable Super Gonk, who would spawn next to Obi-Wan on the tower. If I then mounted Super Gonk and had C-3PO disable the extra, Obi-Wan would jump really high into the air, and with pause walking, be able to walk myself right below this mystery platform to respawn on top of it. Then use a dismount to get higher up behind this terminal and pause fly all the way to the top of the tower. As crazy as all of that is, we're still not done. I should just make that my catchphrase by this point. There were still 4 more jumps in this level, right near the end. Those being 4 jumps to access the 3PO terminal on the far boat. Pause flying to walk doesn't work. There is a slight invisible wall preventing you from walking off. And we can't mount Super Gonk for extra speed. We need both parts of 3PO on that boat in order to use the terminal. And against all odds, I found a way. You'll have to break apart as 3PO and activate the pause flying glitch mid-break, but also be in control of the legs. This weird break apart sends the legs into a minor freefall, and then they can just barely make it over the invisible ledge, go below the boat, and spawn on top. But what about the body? Well, if you break apart near the side of the first boat and get the body to land on the edge of the closest side, you can then pause walk over to the boat, reform, and be done with the level. And I thought Droid Factory was bad. It only took half a year, but the high ground is completed jumpless. This means you can beat every single level, all 45 levels in LEGO Star Wars The Skywalker Saga, without jumping a single time. Now all levels are completable, but what about the overworld? That's a more complicated question. We talked about this a bit in the minimum studs run and why it's hard to count anything in the overworld as part of the campaign. You're unable to replay those sections at all, which is partially the reason why challenges like this take so long to do. For example, the minimum studs run dropped down to a whopping total of 0 required studs in free play, because you literally cannot go back to any of the missions again, meaning you aren't able to count anything in those sections, and it's a similar case here. You can do every story mission jumpless besides one, Rey's puzzles in the Dark Side Cave. This section requires 6 jumps to be done, and if I wanted to go back and play it again, I would have to start a brand new file, beat all of The Force Awakens, then the first half of The Last Jedi, and that's just to make it there. Luckily, I am able to return here in the post-game and recreate similar puzzles to what is found in the main game, and test if any of our solutions will work. And spoiler alert, they don't. Pause flying doesn't work. Knockback doesn't work. Nothing works. The only thing these AI-controlled players can do is run and jump wherever you go, and that's it. There's no out-of-bounds clip known for this room, and even if there was, it's likely that it wouldn't matter. This is the definitive final frontier. That puts us in an awkward spot. Without a doubt, this game can be beaten all the way through, without ever jumping in free play, and all of the game's levels can be beaten jumpless in story mode. But this single room, this one insignificant mission, throws the whole challenge out of whack. So, where do we go from here? I'm not going to make any promises to a follow-up to this video in the future. I am very happy with how far I was able to take this challenge, and am even more happier with where it brought this channel. Something about this final room will always bother me, like a rock in your shoe or an itch that you just can't scratch. But when you put it in perspective, it's very small in the grand scheme of things. Feel free to try your hardest to crack it, and if you do, feel free to send it in the LEGO channel of my Discord. I'd love to see the solutions you guys come up with. But that's really all I have for you guys today. And if you haven't watched the Minimum Jumps or Minimum Studs series before, I highly recommend you go back and do so, as they're a ton of fun. But hey, I've been BD1P, and I'll see you guys in the next video.